All right, so welcome. Welcome back if you've been here before. Um, this is the last in our career fair preparation series, focusing on writing and some of the more technical aspects of writing, editing, that sort of thing. And really, with writing, there's a lot more to editing, which we'll get to in a second. Before we start that, are there any questions about the career fair or anything else that's going on? It's a habit. I have to ask it like I do a class. Any questions from last week? Okay. Did you say when? Friday. Next Friday. It's next Friday from noon to 4. Um, Although it's not, you don't have to be there for the full 4 hours, right? Okay. Okay. Well, in that case, let's jump in. So we're going to start by talking about the typical writing process. Um, Way this usually starts when you sit down. This is for any document. Okay, we're talking resumes, cover letters, reports, whatever you're doing. Okay, typical writing process. You need to figure out your audience and your goal, right? If you're writing for your professor, you would write it differently than you're writing for a potential employer. Okay. And then your goal. Are you writing to get an A, or are you writing to get hired? Or are you writing to get to the point where they want to interview you so you can get hired? All right. So figure out your actual goal that the piece is supposed to be achieving. Right. And that needs to be a little bit more specific. So it's not like I'm writing to get a job. No, that's not it. Okay. You're writing to get to the next step, figure out what that next step is in the process and write to that. Okay. So for a cover letter, usually the cover letter is intent is to get them to read your resume. For the resume, usually the intent is to get them to ask you to come in for an interview. Right. So it kind of builds on itself like this. So figure out where you are in the step and make the document appropriately. Okay. So you got your audience, you got your goal. So now you need to figure out what you need to actually cover. So what needs to go into the document, right? So if you're writing your resume, usually you want to put your education, your work experience, skills, summary of your skills, all those things, right? For your cover letter, usually going to have a paragraph that introduces yourself, another paragraph that expands on why you would be a good for the company, and then something else that would summarize your overall skills, not the details, but the overall, like this is, I'm a leader for these reasons, right? Something like that. So figure out what actually needs to go into it. Right? And this is the same with even emails. When you're writing an email to a potential employer to meet with them, to talk to them, to get to know them, figure out what different paragraphs you need to have, the general things you were talking about. Okay. So then you figure out the order that you're going to put it all in, because with proper writing, and again, any kind of writing, you're building a story. Okay. You are painting a picture that they are following along, and you are trying to convince them of whatever your goal is, whatever your point is. Okay. So you have their attention, you are directing it. Okay. When they are reading it, they are focused on you and what you have written. They're not going off and trying to form their own conclusions yet. So you have them show them what you want to show them, right? So that's why you're figuring out the order. And then go ahead and build your outline. Okay. For me, the outline can sometimes take longer than the actual writing, because you want to figure out, and if you do a good outline, not just the general topics, but you go and start to going into some of the details, it becomes really easy to fill in. Okay. So then you do your outline. Then you fill it in with all the bad stuff. Okay. It's your first pass. It's going to suck. All right. Don't take time making it good. Not yet. Okay. You are just getting stuff on the paper. Usually this is what takes people the longest, because when they type it, they want to type it perfect the first time. Don't do that. It takes forever if you do that. I mean, you do it however you want to. This is just my process. Okay. But get something down on the paper. All right. Fill in the ideas. And it doesn't matter if they are the worst sentences in the world, just fill it in. Don't turn that in. Okay. After you do that, you go on through a process of refining it. So you refine the bad into okay, you refine the okay into goodish, into better, the better into wonderful, right? It's an ongoing process until you get it to somewhere where it looks much better than that original crap dump. Okay. After that, you ask for feedback. So I give it to Arwa. Arwa, could you please read over my resume? Thank you. All right. And then I'm going to cry because I think it's wonderful. I've spent all this time, like steps like 4 through 9, making it awesome. And then she's just going to trash it. It's going to come back completely covered in red. And I'm just going to be devastated. But that's actually a good thing. I want the devastation. Right? I don't want the devastation. I want the comments. I want them to actually take a lot of time to read it and to give me good feedback. Not positive feedback, but feedback. Right? What's bad about it? What is good about it too? But all of that. So then you're going to incorporate that feedback into your writing, go through this process again where you're polishing it up again and everything like that. Then you're going to ask somebody else for feedback. Okay. And then you repeat the steps 11 through 12 where you get devastated and you rewrite it. Okay. All right. The thing to consider with this, even though you're getting feedback and you're adapting it to it, when you repeat it, you need to consider what you think will work best. Okay? A lot of this is based on opinion. It's other people's opinions. You're taking it into account because if somebody read something and it confused them, chances are somebody else will read it and it'll confuse them too. So even if they're saying, yeah, you wrote this, it's confusing, you should have written it this way, you don't necessarily have to write it the way they said, but take into account that whatever you wrote was confusing. Okay, so you're getting to the root problem there. Does that make sense? Okay. You're not necessarily taking their advice, but you're looking at what they got hung up on. Okay. Then for resumes and all that, you submit the document. And since the resume is a living document, you continue refining it later. Come back and realize that you like this word better than that word or this format, or you keep adding stuff to it. Okay. Now obviously, you don't do this for like every assignment that you ever turn in, but the major stuff. So the major stuff when it comes to applying for a job will be that first email that you send them. It'll be the resume, the cover letter, all that stuff that's going to make that really strong impression that you want to make. Okay. So some people like to think of this kind of like sculpting. So you start with your big block of rock and you start chiseling it down, right? Or at least this part. So you start with big rock. It's just a rock. So you give it the rush shape and you come back and you give it a little bit smoother, a little bit finer, and you keep refining it down and down until you get a really nice looking whatever it is you're sculpting, right? Those of you who know me know I'm a little bit more crass. I prefer to think of it as like a raw sewage treatment. Okay. Start with a bunch of crap, right? And then you filter it and you filter it and you filter it and you filter it until you get to clean drinking water. Okay. However you want to picture it, that's the idea. You're doing multiple passes. It's not a single and done. Okay. At least not when you get it really good. Okay. This is kind of the difference between seeing somebody who looks like an amateur and somebody who looks like a professional. It's how much they actually spend refining and editing. Questions so far? Time to take a coffee break. Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit more about feedback. So good writing, not writing, good writing requires targeting your audience, right? When you write, and those of you who've been here before, when you write a document for your career, who is it about? I'm writing my resume. Who is the resume about? Somebody's been here before. Arwa, it's about the job. Okay. You were sweating. It's about the job. Okay. It's about the employer that you're trying to work with. All right. Now it seems a little weird, right? Because my resume, it's supposed to be about me. Yes, that's true. But when you're writing it with them in mind. You're writing it figuring out what do they want to see. Put yourself in their shoes and figure out if they were trying to hire somebody and they were looking at your resume, what would catch their eye, right? So when you're writing it, you really need to take their perspective as best as you possibly can. You can get that by reading the job application and by reading about the company. Okay? So we say it's about the company because in a way it really is. You are coaching it about you, but to be about them. Okay? When you're writing a cover letter, you're trying to write it in a way that they read it and they're like, oh my gosh, why doesn't this person already work for us? Right? They're making it so they can actually picture you there, that you already fit in with the culture and with the company. So good writing targets the audience that you're going for. You are not your audience. You don't know your audience's specific opinion until they read it. Right? So you're not going to know what they think about it until they read it. But you can ask for the opinion of a smaller number of people around you who can then give you their opinions. This is science, right? You're conducting an experiment. You're sampling. Okay. If I write my resume and I want to have somebody look at it, but I can't actually give it to the employer, but I give it to four other people, I can take the average of their opinions basically and put it together and come up with something better. Okay. I'm never going to get their exact opinion. The closer that I can match my sample to the people who I'm applying to, the better, right? So if I don't necessarily know the person who's going to be reading my resume from Abbott, but I do know somebody who works at Alcon. I can give it to them and see what they think, right? So you're sampling and you're trying to get your sample as close to them as you possibly can, but you work with what you have. Okay. So you want to collect multiple samples and has to be greater than 0, which is you. Okay. So get multiple samples. You need to study your samples, analyze what they're actually editing, what they're saying, what they're commenting on to get to that root, to get that common denominator, the issues that seem to keep creeping up. Consider the outliers. Okay. Was Bob just being stupid or was it actually bad writing? Right. Um, and it could be that there's actual bad writing, like totally, right? So always consider it in that context. Was there a specific word that's tripping this person up or something like that? This also requires perspective taking. Okay? Summarize the macro and micro changes that need to be made. Some of that's just like you need to put a period here or a comma there, right? That's easy. That's the micro stuff. The macro is when you start to see trends. Like if 3 out of 4 people said that this part was confusing, or I didn't really get why you were applying for this job, that sort of thing, that's what you need to consider when you're coming back for the macro. It can be useful to make a checklist here, right? And then move on to your next iteration. So go back, make those changes, do the process again. Okay? If you can only do it once, at least do it once with several people. But if you can go for a couple rounds, all the better. Okay? All right. So that's about editing and feedback generally. Don't take the feedback personally. A lot of people don't necessarily know how to give cushy feedback where it's going to feel good. Okay. If you ask me for feedback, I'm probably going to cross something out and say, I don't understand. Right. It's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's just I don't have much time. So make sure you don't take it as a personal attack, but take it as something to help you improve. They're actually taking their time to help you improve your writing. Okay. Okay. Anybody heard of George Orwell? Got a couple of head nods. Good. What's he known for? Wrote 1984? Animal Farm? Didn't he write War of the Worlds? That's the one I always think of as. Oh, crap. That's Orson Welles. Dang it. Wrong Wells. George Orwell, he was a good writer. Okay. He has 6 general rules for writing. This goes for most any writing, especially for professional. So never use a metaphor, a simile, or other figure speech which you are used to seeing in print. What does that mean? Don't use the same boring stuff. Exactly. Don't use the cliches. Don't use the things that people see every day. Okay. It sounds too cliche. Try to avoid that. Never use a long word where a short one will do. So when you're writing and your resume goes off to these people, they're going to spend 7 seconds looking at it. They don't want to read your big loquacious words, right? These huge words that they have to go look up. They don't want that. So if you can think of something that's shorter and more efficient, use it. Always use it. Okay. Make sure it's saying the thing that you want it to say, but go with the short. Is definitely better than the big. If it's possible to cut a word out, always do. Okay? A lot of people like to go with the more flu-flu-y writing where it's like the in order to, or as I first noticed, things like that. You don't need those phrases. You can just cut them down. Never use the passive where you can use active. That's especially true in your resume. Okay. What do I mean by passive versus active?
Basically, instead of saying like the tree was cut down by the man cut down the tree.
Yeah. To turn it to where it's active. So the action is actually happening by the person as opposed to happening to the tree, right? Oh, I just had one too. I had thought as opposed to I thought, right? So if I say I had thought that this was this, right? Um, well, I could just shorten and take out had and say I thought, right? That's more active. That's me doing it. It's not saying that I had the thought, but I'm actually thinking it, right? Does that make sense? So these words that we put in to help qualify to make it sound a little less softer, but we don't need those. It sounds stronger when you take that stuff out. Okay. Never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Again, you're going for speed. Okay, you're going for ease of reading, right? The people who are usually reading your resume and everything like that are recruiters. They don't necessarily even know the scientific jargon. So if it trips them up, don't do it. Just use regular old English. Okay. And then break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. What does that mean? What's that? That's not going to have wrong opinions necessarily. You can have wrong opinions. It's just how you write them.
It's your writing, not just fit all
Exactly.
that.
Right? Don't make your writing sound so terrible trying to do all this stuff that it really is terrible, right? That you read it and you're like, who the hell wrote this, right? Don't do that. Okay. If it sounds bad when you do all this, break some of the rules. Okay. You actually have to read it and make sure that you're okay. So yes, try to abide by the rules the best you can, but if it's going to make it terrible, then break occasional rules. Yep, does that make sense? Writing is never hard and fast. A lot of it is opinion. Yeah. Other good advice for professional writing: avoid alliteration always. Okay, what's alliteration? Starting with the same letter or the same sound, right? It makes it hard to process when you have alliteration. So avoid alliteration. Prepositions are not words to end sentences with. It ends with the preposition. That's just a common rule. So check that. Don't end with of, with, whatever all these other prepositions are. You can never remember them. Avoid cliches like a plague. You wouldn't have those in professional writing anyways, but definitely try to avoid them. Eschew, ampersand, and abbreviations, etc. Avoid anything like abbreviated if you can avoid it. Eschew means avoid. I don't like the word eschew because it sounds too fancy. Don't generalize. So we'll actually see this a lot with writing. When we had our our physiology lab class, a lot of the problem that we would have with scientific writing is people would generalize too much. So instead of saying an actual quantity, they would say there was a large amount. Well, just tell me the amount. Don't tell me large. Large means different to you than it does to me, right? So don't do that. Avoid that if you possibly can, and then use specific amounts. Um, Related to that, be more or less specific. So this goes back to generalizing. Okay? Comparisons are as bad as cliches for the most part. I would agree with that. Sentence fragments, eliminate. What is a sentence fragment? Phrase that doesn't stand by itself, right? Eliminate. That's not a sentence, right? What do you need for a sentence? Subject and verb. Yeah. Okay. So there's no subject here, right? There's a verb, eliminate, no subject. Sentence fragments, there's no verb. Okay. That's the point there. So get rid of no, you need to know, you don't need to know everything about grammar. Okay. This is not an English class. You are not an English major. Not everybody is expected to write perfectly, but you need to know about run-ons and you need to know about fragments. So do a little bit of a review for those, okay? Because those will look bad if you turn something to an employer that has a run-on or a fragment. Right? Okay, don't exaggerate. A billion times worse than understatement. Parenthetical remarks, however relevant, are unnecessary. If you read my emails, you know I use them a lot. That's because I don't write professionally with y'all. Okay. I tend to write more, hopefully jokingly. That's what I try to do anyways. But you should not write the way I write in my emails. Always write, try to avoid the parentheses, everything like that. And then no rhetorical questions. Okay. There's not a place for that in professional writing or scientific writing. Okay. Let's talk a bit more about editing. So when I edit, and this is you editing your own material or anybody else's, read it out loud. Read it out loud, observing the punctuation that you put in there. So if you put a comma, needs a pause. Put a period, needs a longer pause. Exclamation point, which you probably shouldn't be using anyways, needs to be excited, right? So actually use it with the punctuation. And as you're reading it, is it difficult to read out loud? That's really where you can tell if you've used alliteration. Sometimes it's not so obvious when you're just reading it in your head, but when you read it out loud and you can't say it because it trips up your tongue, that becomes obvious. Okay. Do you start the sentences the same each time? So cover letters are especially hard for this because everybody starts the sentences with I. I did this, I like this, I want to do this, I, right? It's really hard to read and it's really boring. So you want to try to change up the structure a little bit. Same with starting with the word the. I put piece here, even though they're different, it's the same type of thing. Right? If you start every sentence with this little tag on that also or in addition and as well, it gets repetitive. The structure of the sentence becomes repetitive. Okay? Again, not an English major. These are just things that you check for as you're reading. It's the same words repeatedly. So, and the big words are good. The source is always better. Okay. So, no, big words are bad. Sorry, big words are good once. Your fancy words that you really like. So if I was going to use a shoe, I would use a shoe once, right, to avoid. But I don't want to use a shoe 3 times in the same writing because it becomes really obvious that that's a word I like a lot. I'm clinging onto it because it sounds fancy. Don't do that. Okay. Instead, use at the source, look up alternatives. So when you're reading out loud, listen for those words. Okay. When you use at the source, though, you need to make sure that whatever it is you pick has the same nuance because the source will tell you similar words, but not an exact match necessarily. So make sure you actually know the definition that it matches up. You can change the tone of a lot of things with the words that you use. The words matter. Does it take too long to know what each sentence is about? So this is another one I see all the time. So in order to get to the end of the sentence and understand what it's actually talking about, most people will read the entire thing and not realize that the point of the sentence appears at the very end when I say write short sentences. Okay. You don't know what I'm actually trying to say until you get to the last 3 words, but there's another 30 words in front of it or something like that. Okay. By the time most people get halfway here, they stop. I'm not going to read the entire sentence. What is this? Right? Don't back into sentences. That's what I usually refer to this because it feels like you're starting with the end and going back to the beginning. Start, get to the point, make it easy for the person who's reading it. Okay. So avoid long sentences. When I was doing professional writing, I was told if you have any sentences that are longer than 35 words, they're too long. So you can do a simple word count. 35 words actually doesn't look that long when you look at it. But 35 words is long when you actually are reading through it and trying to retain the information. Okay. 35 words is like the max. You don't want a lot of those sentences. Most should be short. Okay. Do ask multiple people for feedback. Actually, if it's a really important document, I like to target the people that I'm asking. So if I know somebody who's in HR, I would like to ask them. If I know somebody who's in the field that I'm going to, I'm going to ask them. I'm going to ask them to look for different things if I can. Okay. Asking for specific feedback. You can tell them, please read this and let me know if it fits the job post I'm applying to. Would you hire me based on this? Right. When you read this, does it sound like I fit within that company? So you're not just saying, here, read this, let me know what you think, but ask them for specific things. That gives them something to look for. Yeah. When I give you a document, I say, please read over this and let me know what you think. That's pretty broad. Most people are going to say, hey, it's good. It's okay. Right. But when you ask them to say, hey, look for this particular thing, then they'll get more into details. The other thing with this is be careful who you ask. Don't ask your mom. Okay. If I ask my mom, she's going to tell me it's awesome. If I want an honest opinion, I'll ask my spouse. She'll shred it. No problem. She'll collect my tears. No. But dude, be careful who you ask. Make sure that they know that you're not just looking for a pass, that you actually want real feedback, that you actually want to know what's good and bad, right? Because a lot of people don't want to actually give you feedback. They want to mollify you, right? They want to say, oh, that's pretty good. Yeah, you can turn this in. You want the real stuff. Okay. So what are you actually checking for when you're editing? Are you saying what you need to say? Okay. We talked about the audience already. You know your goal. What about their goal? And they're reading it. What is their goal? So this goes back to that perspective taking. If I'm a potential employer, my goal is to quickly find somebody who I can bring in and interview. Okay. So are you meeting their goal? Keywords. So I said don't repeat certain words over and over and over again. Keywords are different. Okay, keywords are when you look through the job application or the job posting and you see that they keep emphasizing you need to know C plus, you need to know C plus, right? You need to put those keywords in there. Okay. Are you saying what you mean to say? So this is intent versus interpretation. This is the problem with email. Okay. If you haven't had this experience yet, it's a lot of fun. When you write something and somebody takes offense to it, even though you didn't mean it to be offensive, it's a lot of fun to deal with. Okay. I mean that sarcastically, in case you couldn't tell. It's very easy to misinterpret things. Okay. So when you read through it, I would actually comb through it in a way that's looking to purposefully misread things. Okay. Try to be that person. Okay? Try to be the one who's always trying to cause trouble. Do that to yourself. It's not that you have to go through and try to fix everything perfectly, but figure out how easy it was to misinterpret it. Okay? And then fix accordingly. Are you saying it clearly and efficiently? I get tagged for this a lot for my grammar check because I like in order to. And then it's like, you don't need an order. It's like, no, you're right. No, you just say two. Right? In order to means the exact same thing as two. Okay. I'm just wasting space if I put in order. So cut that sort of stuff out. You don't need it. Grammar said you need to know what run-ons and fragments are and how to identify them. Okay. Do y'all know what run-ons are? What's a run-on? You said you did. I won't make fun of you if you're wrong. See, I will make fun of you if nobody responds because that's just sad. Have an educational system to it. Sorry, that's bad writing, but it's not a run-on.
Disconnecting several phrases.
Closer, maybe closer. Basically, a run-on is when you have two complete sentences and you put and in between and you link those two sentences, but you don't put a comma or anything else. So if my first part of the sentence and my last part can both be just standalone sentences, but I don't really have anything that connects them with a comma, that's a run-on. Okay. So if I said, her hair looked pretty and she smelled nice. I don't know why I'm choosing that. Was a weird one to come to head. If I say that without a comma before the and, that is a run-on. Okay, I'll put a comma in there. That's correct. Right. Even more correct would be to break it down into two sentences because that's easier to read. Right. So if I were to say instead, her hair looked, I don't even remember what I said originally. His feet were big and smelled funny instead of his big were feet and they smelled funny. That's a complete sentences, right? So you could, coming up with examples off the top of my head is not a strength. For anybody who's watching this later, I'm actually writing on the board right now. So, okay. So his feet were big and they smelled funny. So the part before the and is a complete sentence. The part after the and is a complete sentence, right? So in that case, I need a comma. His feet were big and smelled funny. His feet were big as a sentence, but smelled funny is not. Okay, so that's not a run-on. That's perfectly acceptable. Okay. You can find lots of stuff to practice with online. Read your own reading, read your own reading, read your own writing. You'll be surprised how frequently it can pop up. We won't spend too much more time on that. Okay, so know what run-ons are, know what predicts are, avoid them. When you use however, there are clear rules on how you're supposed to use however. If you use however, it's supposed to be followed by a semicolon. Okay. Another silly rule perhaps, but you see it a lot and people know it. Okay. Unclear pronouns. When I teach writing, when I was teaching for lab writing or anything like that, I would completely say eliminate all pronouns because it's really easy to confuse them. Okay. If I don't know what your pronoun is referring to, it causes a lot of confusion. It's another one where I should have had an example already. Actually, here, his feet were big and they smelled funny. Okay. If I were to have said, his shoes were green, it's a period and get rid of that. So now I have three sentences. His shoes were green, his feet were big, they smelled funny. They can now be referring to the shoes or his feet. Okay. That's what I mean by confusing pronouns. Unless it is absolutely clear what your pronoun is referring to, don't use it. Okay. It is the most common pronoun. It, IT. Okay. It is really easy to get confused. So if you have any its, do a search for it, a word search at the end of whenever you're done writing. Look for all your its and figure out if they're confusing. If you have this, use the word this. I think this is one of my things. It's not. This is always supposed to be followed by the object that it's describing. Right? So this shoe or this board or whatever, right? If I were to say this is white, I could be referring to the board, I could be referring to the wall, be referring to the light, I could be referring to a lot of different things, right? So make sure that this is, you're specifying this. Okay. All right. Comma usage, again, it's just handy to review the rules. You don't need to be an expert on it, but it helps to know. Okay. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's not that many. Spelling, spell checks is great, but spell check doesn't always catch everything. Okay. It's getting better, but looking for the different spellings. So there. There's 3 different there's. Comma versus coma. I think this one's comma. I still have to look it up because I can't remember how to spell the right one. Okay. I'm trying to write the word coma and I write comma. Looks pretty bad. Right. I use this example, but I probably shouldn't. I was working in a different office once where we were ordering a refrigerator. Okay. And instead of saying refrigerator, one of our people would write back, we need to order a fridge. Okay. When you misspell the word fridge, it's completely inappropriate for the workplace. Right. So I had to write her back and say, hey, that's not the word you think that is. Okay. Make sure you know the words you're using. Make sure you spell the words correctly. Okay. Fridge is Fridge. Okay. So I'm going to leave that there. Another one that I used to make a stupid mistake on when I was younger is instead of saying, I always wanted to sound fancy for a while, so I'd say, I'm having digestive issues, except I wouldn't use digestive, I would say gestation because I got the words mixed up. I can't have gestation issues. Okay? It doesn't work with my anatomy. I can have digestive issues. So make sure you know your words, okay, if you're going to use them. All right, another thing you're looking for is your spacing. You don't want a blank or a wall of text on a piece of paper. No one's going to read it. Okay? You want to have it spaced out. You want white space on it. You want paragraphs. You don't want paragraphs that are this long. You want it to be semi-short, right? Break it up. You want consistent spacing, especially on your resumes. Be consistent throughout the resume. If you put a space every time you have a header, make sure you do that every time. Okay, don't have a space after the header one time and then have it bunched up against the next time. So be consistent there. Widows and orphans. I think Word actually calls these widows and orphans still. That's when you're writing on a paper, on a page, and you go on to the next page and it's only 2 lines. I think that's the widow, right? So you have an entire paragraph on one page and then 2 lines on the next page. So you kind of lose track of what was going on there. And the opposite, where you have like a line on one page and then you have the rest of the paragraph on the next page. Okay. There is a setting in Word where you can actually make it and it will avoid that for you, or it'll pay attention to it for you. Okay. This just goes back to looks. This is where you get into professional looking documents versus not professional looking documents. Right. A lot of the thing about looking professional is these nitpicky things. Okay. Sentence length, I mentioned this, 35 words is long. James Joyce used a sentence that was 3,687 words long. Guarantee I probably don't know what the actual point of it was. Okay.
Make it that long without.
You can make it wrong and be correct, right? But not long and make sense.
How do you make it that long? Right.
There's a lot. You can do a lot. I'm not going to go, yeah. Ask me later. There's a lot of ways you can string them together and still have it make sense. Okay. Punctuation matters. All right. I like this one. It's another one where you have to read it out loud. So I'm sorry, I love you. Or I'm sorry, I love you. One's an apology. The other is my regret in the fact that I'm in a relationship with you. We're going to learn to cut and paste kids. We're going to learn to cut, paste, and paste kids. So one, you're going to cut up the kids. The other, you're being excited with them. A woman without her man is nothing. Oh, wait. A woman without her man is nothing. A woman without her man is nothing. So where you put the comma totally matters, right? I like to fish and I like to eat fish and paint. This one means I like to eat fish and paint, right? This one means I like a list of hobbies that I have, right? This is called the Oxford comma or the serial comma. There is debate about whether or not you should be used in that professional writing. Most people say this is the better way to write. Personally, I think that's crap. But you read it, and in your sentences, if you get to the point where you're like this, where I'm eating fish and paint, change it. Okay. The thing is to be aware of the confusion that it can cause. This is actually changed laws before because people used or did not use a serial comma. It was gun control. I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah. So be sure you're aware of those. Okay. Almost done with the talky part. So resources, things that you can do. Do a quick review of the writing rules and punctuation. It doesn't take long. Okay. There's a lot of websites out there, Grammar Girl, Grammarly, Grammar, whatever. There's a ton out there. Okay. Just glance through them. Doesn't take long. The books, I used to use Strunk's Elements of Writing or something like that. It's a pretty handy book. It's only like this thick, so it's definitely easy to read through. Wrong. Thesaurus, most definitely use Thesaurus. I have it bookmarked. And then have the dictionary so you can make sure you're using the right word, right? So when Thesaurus tells you to use a word, you know that it's the right one. Okay? We didn't really go into nuance much, but the word that you pick, look at the examples of words when they use it. Okay? Don't just start like grabbing words and using them. Look at them used in sentences to make sure that it's appropriate. Because usually you can get from the examples what those are supposed to mean. Do your spell and your grammar check. That should already be turned on, hopefully, on all of y'all's PCs or whatever you're using. The internets. Do not use phrases or words you do not know. So when I'm saying the internet, I mean actually look up phrases if you're not sure what it means. One of the examples I can think of with this one, I was working with somebody. Yeah. So I would say something along the lines of, let's have a powwow, which I never say. It was a weird thing to say, right? But then I'm like, well, what's that based on? Well, it's based on Native Americans. Why are we saying this? That's weird. Don't do that, right? And she gave me the example. Um, she was a Black woman from Chicago, and she used to say, you must be out of your cotton picking mind. Okay. Now, we got that from cartoons when we were kids. Okay. Just where we got it from. But one day she's like, huh, what does that even mean? And she looked it up, and cotton picking is cotton picking mind is a reference to slavery. Okay. It's because they were picking cotton. If you're out of your cotton picking mind, yeah. So know the origins of the phrases when you use them, know what they mean. Be careful. Yeah. It does always come back to you and reading your own work, so make sure you do it. And then we have a lot of other resources available. So you have the Writing Center, which you cannot go to them with just the roughest of rough drafts and expect anything good from it. Same with when you're sending it to anybody else. The reason we had all those iterations before you actually shared it with anybody for feedback is because you need a finished product before you share it with anybody. Don't give them crap. Okay? So the Writing Center, the University Career Center is good for reviewing resumes and so on. Your friends, your colleagues sitting around you, pay it forward, meaning read theirs as well when it comes time. During my PhD, we would constantly read each other's papers that we were submitting for publication. It's a great way to see how other people write and to figure out what to do and what not to do. Okay, so when you're reviewing your peers' resumes and everything like that, you're figuring out what works well and what doesn't work well. Okay, so it's not just that you're benefiting them, you're benefiting yourself. Do ask family. Just make sure mom knows, hey, go hard on it. You can ask your professors, you can ask mentors, find people. Okay, you're not in a vacuum. And then the last thing, you can use templates and examples, but don't plagiarize. So there's a template out there for pretty much everything you could possibly want. When I was looking for, like, you can find emails that are like, email to explain why I wasn't at school because I was sick and my toe was broken. You can find an email template for that, I'm pretty sure. Okay. There are templates for all sorts of emails. So go out, look for them. Don't just blankly follow it though. Find what you like, write to it. Don't copy and paste. Okay. Make sure it fits you. It has to sound like it's coming from you. Okay. Make sure it fits you is the problem with why you don't want somebody else to write your resume. This is why you're not paying somebody else to write your papers or your resumes. Because it doesn't sound like it's from you. And when you actually get to the job, they'll know. It needs to sound like it's coming from you. All right, so use your own words, use your own phrasing, make it from you. All right. That is everything as far as the talky type part. The pizza's still not here. A little bit on the career fair preview. So if you haven't registered, this QR link will take you, QR code will take you to the link, which will take you to the registration. We have 9 companies who are already signed up for it. It is good, even if you're not looking for a job, to go. Okay. Even if you're not looking for an internship, it's good to go and talk with these people, right? You're getting experience talking with them now. If you're a first year, you're getting the experience talking with them, you're getting more comfortable with it. So when it is time to actually go and get that job, you're better at it. Okay. So try that, make sure you're serious on it. And then finally, if you can give us a little bit of feedback on how this went, anything that we could have done better, including the pizza, I know, that would be appreciated. Okay. Still not here. Can you check in the hallway? Okay. Right. Nothing out there. Okay. I'm gonna stop recording now.